Welcome to Speak Out, Stand Out by Green Communications, where we're learning how to help our kids become better communicators. We believe our voices are the strongest asset we have, and our mission is to empower the next generation to use their voices to make a difference in the world around them. Whether you are a parent, an educator, or are just invested in today's youth, we hope this podcast will help you build confidence in our future, one voice at a time. Welcome back to Speak Out, Stand Out by Green Communications. I'm Elizabeth Green, and today's guest expert is Carley Aroldi. Carley is a play therapist and the founder of Peaceful Parenting, and we're really excited to have Carley here today to talk about how we can incorporate communication skills and confidence in our kids when they're really young and by doing a lot of fun things, right?
Using play. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Carley. So first of all, just go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell our audience a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So as you mentioned, I'm a play therapist, and I really specialize in supporting parents who have challenging kids and teaching them play therapy skills they can use to foster coping, foster calm, and foster connection at home and communication too. So I'm excited to be here doing this. And I've had a private practice outside of New York City for a little over a decade now, and really focusing on group support too, because I feel like our communities have kind of fallen apart with the events of the last couple of years. So really working to support parents in community as well as individually.
That's great. And so for somebody who's never heard the word play or the phrase play therapy before, what is that? Is it exactly what it sounds like?
Great question. So yes, what I like to say is that play is a child's language. And if we want to communicate with them, if we want to be understanding what's happening for them socially, emotionally, we need to be speaking their words, right? So when I say play therapy, it can mean 100 million things, right? If I'm working with a 10-year-old, I might say something like, let's put together a soundtrack right now for how you're feeling in your life, right? And that is going to elicit a lot more than me just being like, how's school? How are things with mom and dad, right? So that might be one piece of it. Every day when kids come into my office, I have like 1,000 little mini toys, and I just say, pick a mini toy to show me how you're feeling today. And that's going to be really different if the kid picks a dragon. I'm going to get a lot of information from that rather than they're just being like, I'm fine. It's fine. What? It's fine. Right? Like, so when we use the language of play, kids communicate a lot more deeply and a lot more authentically. So that's how we use play therapy. It's its own little specialty working with early childhood. I specialize in working with children under the age of 10. I don't really get into adolescence. So I really look to work with parents, mostly of children under the age of 10. And I really specialize in kind of 2 to 8. That's the sweet spot for me.
Gotcha. And I can see how, even though there's obviously a very different field than what I'm in, but I have no experience in counseling or therapy or anything like that. But one of the things we see with our students is the ones who tend to be a little bit more withdrawn, a little bit more shy or nervous about talking in front of a group, having something to do with their hands makes a big difference. So even if we're like, build Legos while you're sharing with us, and it totally seems to take the pressure off. So I could see how that would be the same in what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one of my mentors early on was like, don't ever try to do therapy with a kid unless you've got a deck of cards in your hands. Like, just play some Uno, play some that. And that's just like a hot tip for parents. Like, if you're going to try and talk to your kid, you're not going to just like sit face to face where the pressure feels like it's on. You're going to have them physically moving, right? You might be, like I said, doing a deck of cards. You might be roughhousing a little bit. All the stuff that gets into our nervous system, all the stuff that like opens up our body also opens up our voice, as I'm sure, people in your community know very well.
That's an amazing tip. I mean, it's so simple, right? But it's easy to implement. But I can definitely see that making a difference. Just last night, I was playing a dice game with my son, and he was much more talkative. So I know exactly what you mean. That's great. I love it.
Body moving.
Already learning things. All right, good. Well, I guess today we want to talk about is when we talk about communication and confidence in communication, oftentimes we think about adults or older teens, but all of this goes way back, right? So when they're just learning how to communicate and us supporting them as their brains develop and they learn the different ways to communicate and feel confident about it. So why don't we start with that just a little bit, and like the differences in what we could expect from our children as they're growing and as their brain develops and affects their ability to communicate and the ways that they communicate.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I like to say our children are communicating from us from the minute we lay eyes on them, right? So the idea is pre-verbally, they're still able to communicate. And most parents know this, right? Like, oh, this cry might mean they're hungry. This cry might mean they're bored. This cry might mean they, need to get changed, whatever it might be. And so to lay the foundation for a kid to feel confident in communicating later on in their childhood and then later on in life, we really want to respond to the cues that they give us early on in how they communicate. And so, when we look a little bit about brain development, just to kind of, give the super simple answer of it, when babies are first born, their primal brain is already fired up, right? That is already online. That's their brain stem, their fight, flight, or freeze responses. So they're communicating, with cries and screams and how they're moving their body. They're arching their back. When we respond to those kind of more primal communication, they feel heard, they can feel soothed. And then they know, when I communicate to my primary caregiver, I'm understood, which then encourages more communication. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Then when babies hit like this 12 to 15 month growth spurt, right? That's when their kind of top part of their brain, their prefrontal cortex develops. That part of the brain is the language and the logic. And so when they just begin to kind of communicate very simply, right? And sometimes families will use sign language. Sometimes families will just, use gestures. When they then get to that kind of more verbal communication, they're already primed for, people are going to get my message. So they're more confident in then speaking clearly. And, if we respond to their little cues, they'll start to evolve and create bigger cues.
Yeah. Gotcha. So from the get-go, as long as we're responsive, which, that's how we parent, right? We are automatically building confidence and communication.
Yeah. If we're being responsive. And they've shown studies, not to kind of take it in a darker direction, but, when we had kind of old school orphanages or in, different places in the world where there weren't the supports available to children whose parents couldn't parent them, babies would stop crying. Right? They'd be in cribs and they would cry. And if they understood that no one's going to respond to me, they stop communicating. Wow. So this idea that, and sometimes they're like, that's good. They're not crying. I'm like, no, it's not good that they're not crying. They need to be communicating, but they can learn as young as like a few months old, no one's going to respond to me. So I better just stop. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry, I went like a little dark direction for a second there. It speaks to, the power of responsive caregiving and then the ability for a kid to feel understood and feel this, confidence in my message is important and someone's going to take it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's pretty powerful for sure. Yeah. Well, and so as they, you mentioned they're crying, right? There might be pointing, they might be using sign language as they're growing. Are there other ways that our kids are communicating with us, even when they're, able to have conversations with us that are not words? Yeah, exactly. So number one is behavior. Kids, as their brain is growing and developing, they don't have the regulation and the language skills that we do as we're kind of entering our 20s and 30s. So they're communicating to us in their behavior, right? So this might look like, fussiness after school, like a 7-year-old comes home and they're like, just fussy. We're kind of then translating that behavior to, is this a kid that's overtired? Is this a kid that's hungry? Is this a kid that had a hard day and needs a little extra TLC or a little extra playtime? So behavior is their primary communication. And so when we learn to kind of translate the behavior that they're doing, it gives us the sign of that's, just a way we're receiving their messages. So for example, my son,
he's a pretty easygoing kid. He's 11 now. But when he, like, I can see in his face when he's hungry, right? He may not even recognize that yet. He may not communicate it to me yet, but like it's a shift in his tone. It's a shift in his facial muscles. And I'm like, that kid's hungry, right? So understanding like he's communicating that to me, I take that in and then I reflect it back to him. Like, your behavior is communicating to me that you're hungry. And he's like, yeah, I really could use a sandwich. And I'm like, yeah. So, that's part of the like dynamic of responsive caregiving, that we're attuned to each other, right? I use the word attunement a lot. When we're in tune to, is this person getting me, receiving my message? I'm sure, you speak about that in an audience too. Like, if someone's in a space where they're communicating to a group of people, you have to see, are they with me? Are they understanding what I'm saying? And so that's that kind of parent-child dynamic starts really early. So I would like to say behavior is communication. It's our job to be the interpreter, right? It's our job to translate it so they feel confident in communicating in other ways too.
I think that is a really great point, and something that I personally don't necessarily think about so much as a parent. Now I will start doing that. But, oftentimes when we're talking to our kids, we're doing other things. We're not necessarily looking at them and looking for the facial cues and things like that. So just that reminder of, if you sense something's off, look at them, right? Because like you said, you could tell so much just from their expression.
Yeah, it's like the energy of their body, right? Like, it's the same way that like you can walk into a meeting sometimes and you're like, what just happened in here? Because everybody's body looks tense and everybody's eyes are wide. That when we take in those cues from one another, which our brains are programmed to do through evolution, we take in all these different cues, then we can be more effective in how we're communicating with one another, because it's not just the words, right? It's not just the language. So much of what we're doing is nonverbal, and especially for young kids, like they rely on that nonverbal because they don't have the words yet. So when we get in sync with it, it just makes everything in family life flow a little more easily.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and so talking about the power of play and play therapy. So we've been talking about, they come home from school and you're trying to get a little information out of them. But when we're really being intentional and saying, okay, I want to use this time to, communicate or, bond with my child, whatever it is, how important is play when it comes to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Woo, it's everything, right? It's everything. If we allow the space for it, right? And I think that, not to get on my soapbox too early, but when we have our children's days so structured, so like all the time, we are not allowing for this kind of free play, which is where a lot of their processing is. So it's kind of like, as adults, we're so verbal, we are talking to our friends, or we might, call our spouse, or, go out for a dinner, and like we share and process what's going on in our lives. Kids do that when they're playing. Right? Kids do that when you see them open play with, dolls in a dollhouse, right? When they do sports, they're communicating like, I need to get some of my aggression out, and this is a safe way to do it. So when we allow for kids to really we follow their lead with the play. And that's what I try to encourage parents to do, that it's not like you have to be a play therapist of like, okay, we are going to set up this really important emotional game now. And you're going to tell me when you're feeling sad and angry. Like, who wants to do that? That's not fun. Play is supposed to be fun. But if we can take 5 to 10 minutes a day and just say to our child, what do you want to play right now? I'm yours, right? I'm yours to follow your lead in what you want to play or do. And it might be something like my daughter and I, for like just 15 minutes last night, she wanted to create a whole family of people and draw and color together. And as she's doing that, 2 things are happening. Her body is active and moving. So she's more willing to tell me what went on in school that day, what happened at recess. But then also, the way she's creating these characters and the way she's creating these dynamics between the characters, she's communicating to me stuff that she's processing in her mind. Like, this is the grandfather that is really sick and he's got to go to the hospital. And that's something she experienced recently, right? So giving that kind of open space, that's how they process things. I often work with families with children who are welcoming a new sibling. And when they're playing with me, and if I just say, whatever you want to play, they might play baby and be like, oh, I hate that baby. But like they're playing baby, like this baby's so annoying. I'm like, yeah, that baby is annoying, right? And the idea is that no matter what they express in their play, we allow for it, right? Because if we allow for it in their imagination, it kind of heals it so it doesn't come out in reality. So sometimes parents get really nervous if their kid is doing a little like either violent play or if they're like drawing things that feel a little scarier to them. And I'm like, no, we allow for it in the imaginary realm because that's how we're processing it. It's like if you go to therapy and you're like, I want to kill my husband. Your therapist isn't going to be like, oh, we better call the police because she's planning to kill her husband. It's like, no, I'm processing this in a safe place. That's how kids use play. They process it in a safer place.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And very good. I'm glad you said that too, because those are certainly things that would be concerning when you were talking about the baby doll and thinking, well, what if he hits the baby doll? Is that okay? And then you kind of said, because that doesn't mean he's going to do it in real life, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if we give the opportunities for them to do it in this kind of playful space, it actually makes their connection better outside that space because they've kind of gotten it out, if that makes sense.
I see. Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah. What about the parents that, for like me personally, my kids are a little bit older now that we don't play pretend very often, but I have a really hard time playing pretend. It's like we lose that ability as we grow for some reason. Yeah. What do you say to the parents that are struggling? Like, or you tell if you're playing whatever your child wants you to play, and then they tell you you're doing it wrong, that kind of thing. What kind of advice do you have to the parents that sometimes get irritated whenever we're playing with our kids?
It's so annoying. Like I remember when my son was about 4 and he was just obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine. And I just said to my husband, like, I just don't think I can wheel those trains anymore. I don't think I have it in me. Like, I can't go choo-choo one more time. And I think we have to kind of, first of all, it's okay for us to set our boundaries, right? It's okay for us to say, okay, can I do this for 10 minutes, right? Can I do this for 5 minutes? Like, we don't have to be like, okay, we're going to have a play marathon today and do, hours and hours of this. So as a parent, remembering, can I invest in this for a short amount of time? That's going to be beneficial, right? That's going to be helpful for no matter what. And if we can do short spurts, like if we can do 10 minutes every other day, if we can do, maybe 15 on the weekend, typically parents are able to invest in that. But the second piece is when we kind of let our kid take the lead, it takes the pressure off. We don't have to build their play. They're going to do that themselves. So I think sometimes when parents get in that situation, they're like, well, I don't know what to make my character say, and I don't know what to do. Like, it's so whatever. But if we just kind of let our kid tell us what to do, it's transformative on 2 levels. Number one, it gets us off the hook, right? Like me, I was just playing Barbies with my daughter yesterday. She's 8. And she wanted me to like be the mom. And I'll just say to her, like, what do you need me to say? What should she do next? And just ask her, because then I don't have to think about it. I can just kind of be along for the ride. And she goes, you should tell them she's really mad they're not in bed. Okay, thanks. You guys need to go to bed, right? And so I always say, let your kid be the director. Let them direct it. So that's helpful from like the parent perspective, because I'm off the hook. I don't have to pretend, or I don't have to think about anything. But also, and this is a real healing piece, it lets the kid be in charge in a really safe way. So kids are very rarely in control of their schedule, their time, what they're doing, where they're going, what they're eating. They have very little control in their young lives. And so we give them the control in play. We just say, like, this is your time, baby. Like, how do you need to lead me? And so if, a kid goes like, no, that's not how you say it, you're doing it wrong. Then you can be like, oh, okay. You know exactly what you want. And there you go. There's that communication piece, right? You know exactly what you want to say. You tell me, what am I doing wrong? Let me know. And so again, we're not going to do that when it's, we're out in public and, we're grocery shopping and they're like, you're picking the wrong cereal. No, I'm picking the cereal with the lower sugar. That's what I'm doing there. But in play, you get to be in charge. You get to communicate what you want, and I'm here to respond to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Let them be the director. I think that was a great little snippet too, right?
Yeah.
And just very helpful. And it sounds so much more fun now. The idea of pretend playing and all of that,
It's so relaxing because I think parents have gotten this message in our culture that we have to always be teaching. We always have to be teaching, right? If they're like, oh, 3 years old, can you count how many like toothpicks I put out? Oh, great. You can count to 10. Like, we don't always have to be a teacher. We can just be a follower and a playmate every now and then. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's beneficial all the way around, right?
Yeah.
For both parties, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so kind of stemming off that just a little bit. What about when you're playing games with your kids? And at what point do you, like, for example, my son and I used to play Connect 4 a lot.
Yeah.
And it took a long, long time for him to really grasp the concept and be able to stop me from winning. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to win every single time, obviously, right? Then he's going to get frustrated. But I also don't want to let him win every single time. So when we're talking about games and opportunities to lose or face challenges, what kind of benefits are we looking at for the kids? And when should we allow that? And when should we just play to win?
Yeah, great question. And like I say, this is like my favorite thing to say in working with families all the time is it depends. It depends a little bit on your kid. It depends on where they are in their stage of development. So there's a lot of like, it depends. But so I'll kind of give two different scenarios. If this is a kid that is really kind of struggling, right? Maybe they're having a hard time socially. Maybe they're having a hard time with things in the house. Maybe they're having a hard time learning something and they need a win, right? Like sometimes we just need the win. Then it's okay to kind of like, oh, I didn't even see you. I could have made that Connect 4 and you beat me, right? And if we're doing it in kind of like a genuine, playfully place, that still feels good, right? For a younger kid. But also we want them to practice what it feels like to not win, right? Because there's many times in life we ain't going to win. So and this is my favorite games for this are like Candyland and Chutes and Ladders. Because how many times have you been like up to that like 98th spot on Chutes and Ladders and then you get that freaking slide and you're like, and I'm back down. Woo, and that's life, right? You think you're right up there and no, you're coming right back down. Or even Candyland, where like you're so close to King Castle, and then you're like, oh man, I got the cupcake, and I'm going back to the beginning. So these are really fun. And so if I'm working like either with my own kid or if I'm encouraging parents to do this, I might say stack the deck a little bit. Like you're going to play Candyland, but like if you need to make sure that like that your kid's gonna not win, you can stack the deck and turn and like, kind of say, like, if I get a purple, then I'll get this and I'll get this and I'll get this. Or you can just let the chips slide where they might. But what you're gonna do is as the game starts to kind of approach the ending, somebody's getting close to King Castle or, getting towards that top of that ladder for Chutes and Ladders, you're gonna pause. You're gonna pause and you're gonna slow everybody down. Because what happens is their adrenaline starts going, their cortisol starts going like, oh, are you going to win? Am I going to win? And it creates this kind of tension in their body. Totally normal, right? It's like watching the end of like a football game that you're like, I can't even look. I can't even see who's going to win if it's so close. But if we pause them for a second, we ask them to relax, we ask them to take a breath, and we say in a really empathic, attuned way, wow, it looks like I'm getting really close to winning. That's exciting, but also I can imagine you're feeling a little bit frustrated because you want to win too. So let's pause ourselves. Let's take a breath and let's remember why we're playing, right? So you go back to the idea of like, why we're playing to have a good time. We're playing to spend time together. We're playing like, so you in the moment before it actually goes off the rails, you actually slow them down and you say, I imagine this is what you're feeling. And there's that attunement. And also let's remember why we're here. And no matter what happens in the next 3 minutes, we still had a good time playing. So everybody's winning, right? And that's going to work most of the time. You might still get a flipped Candyland board every now and then. You might still get a tantrum at the end. But you're going to have much more success if you're able to pause and slow them down before that kind of huge burst of adrenaline or huge burst of cortisol happens when they lose. So that's kind of like the trajectory of how do I help my kid from becoming the quote unquote sore loser. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And
Yeah.
honestly, I've never ever considered the fact that kids have their adrenaline is running whenever they're playing a board game, because it's not for us, you know, but like you said, watching a football game, it would be. So
Yes.
it's just the same for them, but I've never considered that fact before.
Yeah. It's kind of stress inducing. I'll do it if my kids right now, they love to play indoor soccer in our house, which I don't mind. My husband drives him crazy, but I'm like, we're going to repaint the living room when they move out. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But I will listen. I'll hear how the game's going. And I'm like, oh, it's getting close to the end. And I'll intervene when it's like, if they're playing till 10, if it's like 8-7, I pause for a second. I'm like, okay, everyone's adrenaline is really high right now. Everyone's really excited. Let's pause ourselves. Let's remember why we're playing. We're playing to have fun. Right. And so no matter who gets to 10. And so the thing is, you have to kind of intervene before, because once it's kind of off the rails, it's like, well, I don't think that last goal should have counted. And I don't think that, like, nobody's in their like logical mind anymore. But if we slow it down and pause, then they can stay grounded. They can stay regulated. And then it doesn't feel as heavy when they might lose.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, Carley, any other tips, or, I mean, you've given us several like tangible things that we can do at home, and I love it. That's what we want. Any other tips for, especially for, let's talk about the parent who is seeing their child struggle with confidence, and maybe they're, you know, either really shy or they don't want to get out there and play soccer because they don't know how to play. And, you know, they feel embarrassed in those situations. Just, you know, what other things can we do at home to help really build that confidence in our kids?
Yeah. Great question. So kind of two things. The first is, I always like to say, we begin with the body. Right? Because if we stay too logical with our kids, that part of that brain that I was saying before, that kind of prefrontal cortex, which sits right behind your forehead, it's not fully developed yet. And it doesn't develop fully until they're 25. So you have a long time before kids are going to get like totally on board logically. So I personally think we talk way too much to our kids. We are always trying to problem solve, and we're like, and then maybe you could do this, and maybe if soccer is like this, then we could do, like, we're talking way too much. So if our kid is holding some anxiety, holding some resistance, holding some reluctance, we begin with the body. And so that might look like something simple, you know, shaking out all of our limbs. I'm like, okay, let's shake out all of our limbs 8 times. Let's hang upside down. Let's have a silly dance party. Like, when we kind of release and loosen up, and I'm sure you know this through, you know, coaching different people in communication, when you do that, when you begin with the body, everything else kind of relaxes. So rather than saying like, well, don't you want to go to soccer because all your friends are there and you're going to have a good time once you join the team? It might be like, ooh, I can tell your body's feeling really tight about going to soccer right now. So let's do a dance party. Right? Or let's go do some relay races, or let's go for a bike ride. When we physically take care of our body, the mind tends to follow. So that's the first piece, is remember, it's not all about logical and like reasoning with them about things.
Yeah.
But then the second is, if they're struggling a little bit with confidence, or they're more slow to warm up, we want to meet them where they're at. It's kind of like, if a kid's nervous about swimming, we're not throwing them into the pool, right? Because that's too much for them at the time. We might say like, I can tell you're really nervous about jumping in that pool. I would be too, right? You're validating, you're connecting, you're acknowledging where they're at. Because once you join their world, they're like, she gets it, he gets it. So I can trust them now, right? So the next thing I'm going to say, they have more buy-in with me. So I can tell you're really nervous about jumping in that pool, or I can tell you're really, your body's feeling tight about going to soccer today. I totally get that. Mine would too. And then you might say, what's the easiest step you could do? What feels easy to you? Does it feel easy to sit by the side of the pool? Does it feel easy to put your feet in the water? Does it feel easy to sit on the first step? If, when my son was younger and he was a really like slow to warm up kid, he wanted to try Taekwondo, but he was so nervous and it was loud and there were like kids that looked like they knew what they were doing. And so I'm like, we're just going to go watch a bunch of classes and we're just going to kind of hang in that studio. And the owner was so amazing with us, but I'm like, can we just hang and watch a couple classes? And we had to watch like 2 or 3. And then he's like, I think I want to get in there. And I'm like, awesome. But the idea was I didn't put the pressure on it. And I wasn't like, come on, all the kids are having so much fun. You want to get in there, because that wasn't matching what he was feeling in the moment. So I had to join him. Instead of asking him to join me, I had to join him. And I'm like, okay, we're going to hang here and we're going to watch a ton. And then when you're ready, you'll be ready. And he was. And that's typically what happens with most kids. And, you know, I'm working with a lot of families right now whose kids are like reluctant about t-ball. And I'm like, hey, just hang on the sidelines. It's okay. And I think that if we remove the pressure and let kids come to it on their own, they will, if we have faith in that. And if they know that like whatever they want to do is okay. And we ask, not that like we don't want them to stay home, but like what's a step that feels like you can manage it, right? It doesn't have to be, hey, I'm going to play goalie, but it might be, okay, I can go in for the warm up and then come out because I don't want to play the game. Okay. And I think being accepting of that actually encourages more participation than pushing that participation does.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. You make it sound so simple and easy, but our brains just don't always think that way. So
what I'll say too is because, and this is like a lot of the work that I do, is helping parents recognize when they're triggered, right? And so if you're sitting on the sidelines and your kid doesn't want to jump into that soccer game, your body feels like it wants to throw up. Your heart starts pounding because you're like, why doesn't my kid want to play soccer? What's wrong with them? All the other kids are playing. So when you're triggered, you cannot co-regulate them, right? You cannot, so you can't help them because your body is in that kind of fight or flight state. So the first thing to do is tend to your own trigger. The first thing to do is calm yourself. Because once your body is calm, you can lend some of your calm to them. And it just makes it flow so much easier.
Yes, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. I love it. That's very, very helpful to me, and I'm sure to others listening. So, Carley, if anybody is interested in learning more about what you offer, potentially working with you, where can they go and what can they find out more about?
Yay, great. So my website's a great place to visit. It's peacefulparentingnj.com because my home base is New Jersey, even though I see people all over the world. So peacefulparentingnj.com. That's a great place to see all the different kind of ways and supports that I offer. I do some individual work with family, but mostly, like I was saying before, I run a group program called PACE, which is Parenting All Children Effectively. And the PACE program is really beautiful because it's a community of like-minded parents who might have sensitive kids, big feeling kids, challenging kids, and they're trying to figure out how to support them, how to build their resilience, how to foster their coping skills. And I teach parents how to use play to do that, how to use play therapy. And as I was saying before, the beauty of the community is that, you know, you're with people that are in the same place that you are. You know, we had a call just last night and one mom was like, gosh, I never talk about this with other moms because it makes me nervous, but being able to be part of a community of people that are trying to create resiliency in their kids together is really beautiful. And it's missing, I feel like, where we are in our culture right now. So that's the main way that I support families, but I do lots of online workshops, free stuff. So jump in there and get on the mailing list, and I'd be happy to keep your community in mind when I'm presenting things throughout the year.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Carley. And we'll be sure to link to everything in the show notes. So it's super easy to hop on and find you on social and get to your website and get on your mailing list. So again, we appreciate you so much and all of your awesome insight today about peaceful parenting. I hope that some of the tidbits today that we've garnered are going to help everybody bring a little bit more peace to their homes and their families and ourselves, right? Because
that's the goal.
That's what it's about.
Peace in your home begins with peace in your heart. So starting here is the first place to go. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for bringing me into your world for a little bit. I love talking this stuff. I could talk all day. Thanks, Elizabeth.
All right. Thank you, Carley.
Have a great day.
If you are looking for more ways to build communication skills in your kids, grab our free mini lesson on how to craft a polished and professional speech out of thin air, along with 52 fun prompts so your kids can practice every single week. You can find that along with info about our upcoming public speaking and debate courses for kids at greencommunicationsedu.com.